Imagine stepping outside tonight, looking up at the sky, and realizing that perhaps everything we know about life, about biology, DNA, the need for water, it's just, well, a narrow carbon-centric viewpoint. What if the universe is teeming with an entirely different kingdom of life, electromagnetic and completely invisible to us?
It's the ultimate sort of paradigm shift, isn't it, in astrobiology? We are diving deep into this theoretical framework that basically says life doesn't need water or organic chemistry.
Probably moving beyond carbon.
Yeah, right into the dark sector of physics. It's pretty wild stuff.
It really is. And our source material for this, well, revolutionary discussion comes from an independent researcher, J. Alfred. Specifically, his paper, Plasma Lifeforms, a Biological Blueprint. It's dated October 30, 2025.
Right.
And it's a remarkably comprehensive piece, really dense, rigorous work that maps out how life might arise not in, a regular ocean, but in this vast, dark sea of plasma.
Yeah, and our mission today really is to kind of methodically break down Alfred's blueprint for this theoretical life. We need to trace its proposed morphology, the physical body plan, and its detailed physiology, the functional systems of a living thing made not of ordinary matter, but of this self-interacting dark plasma.
And we'll be connecting the dots, right, between lab experiments, things seen in space plasma.
Exactly, constantly connecting those dots. Structures in labs, astronomical bodies, and how this proposed life might actually work at a cellular level.
Yeah.
It's about seeing the parallels.
So the core premise here, it sounds simple, but the implications are just huge.
Totally.
If some dark matter exists in this specific state as self-interacting dark plasma, and if lab experiments suggest that complexity, self-organization, the beginnings of life, can spontaneously pop up in plasma,
Which they do, yeah.
then any resulting plasma life forms would just follow standard Darwinian evolution. They'd naturally evolve structures we already see in electrical plasma bodies out there.
Right. And the crucial context, the thing that gives this theoretical life a sort of fighting chance, is the nature of dark plasma itself.
Yeah.
Because ordinary plasma, like in our sun, highly unstable, dissipates constantly, cools down fast into neutral atoms. If life depended on that, it'd be over in a flash.
Right. Blink and you miss it.
But dark plasma, the theory is it's stable, long-lived.
And that stability is the absolute key ingredient for any kind of, dark biology. So what are the specific factors that give dark plasma this longevity?
Okay, so there are basically two main things stopping the charged particles in dark plasma from just binding up into neutral atoms and killing the plasma state.
Okay.
First, a significantly weaker dark electric charge, and second, pervasive insulation.
Let's start with the weaker force. How much weaker are we talking, and why does that really matter?
Well, the dark electric charge is estimated to be incredibly weak compared to our normal electric charge, maybe 1/100th, perhaps even down to 1/1,000,000th of our standard charge.
Wow, that's tiny.
It is, and this dramatically weakens the electromagnetic force in that dark sector. So it's just not strong enough to efficiently bind charged dark particles together into stable neutral atoms.
Wait, hold on. If the force is so weak, how can it possibly hold together a complex living structure? That sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah, that's a good question, because weak is relative, right? While it stops them binding to atoms, Alfred points out that even if it's 1,000,000 times weaker than our electromagnetic force, it's still something like 10 to the power of 30 times stronger than gravity.
Okay, so still massively dominant over gravity.
Overwhelmingly the dominant force. It's absolutely strong enough to organize complex controlled structures, to maintain stability, to drive movement, just not quite strong enough to collapse everything back into neutral atoms easily. It hits a kind of sweet spot.
Right, strong enough but not too strong. And the second stability factor was insulation, the abundance of neutral particles.
Yes, this is critical. In this theorized dark plasmasphere, neutral particles are thought to outnumber the charged ones by maybe 5.5 to 1.
So mostly neutral stuff floating around.
Exactly. And this huge crowd of neutral dark matter acts like a physical buffer, an insulator.
Okay, so if the charged particles are insulated, what does that actually achieve, biologically?
Well, it works on a few levels. First, the insulation just increases the average distance between the charged particles' electric fields, which weakens their ability to attract and bind even further.
Makes sense.
Second, and this is crucial for life, it cuts down on non-electrostatic interactions. Things like just bumping into each other, kinetic collisions. This lets the system stay in a sustained, dynamic, but overall stable state for potentially immense periods of time.
And that sustained stability.
Yeah.
That's the foundation, right? Because any biology needs to maintain charge separation.
Absolutely.
That's the basis for energy gradients, for communication, for cell structure, everything. In ordinary plasma, that separation vanishes instantly.
Exactly, it just neutralizes. But in dark plasma, because of these two factors, the weaker binding force and the physical insulation from all those neutrals charge separation can potentially be sustained indefinitely. That's the absolute bedrock requirement for any life processes to even get started.
Okay, this detailed stability brings us to the specific type of plasma needed for this kind of complexity. It's called complex plasma, or sometimes dusty plasma.
Right. Complex plasma isn't just ions and electrons. It includes charged particles alongside larger, sort of chemically formed dust particles. In ordinary matter, that dust might be tiny grains of hydrogen, hydrocarbon silicates, little specks.
Mm.
The mechanism is fascinating. Electrons are so tiny and mobile, they tend to stick onto these much larger dust particles. This makes the dust particles highly polarized, giving them a massive net negative charge.
And this hugely charged dust, that's the key to the complexity.
It totally changes the game. It unleashes complex, nonlinear dynamics. When you have these huge charge fluctuations concentrated on the dust, the plasma behaves in ways simple ion-electron plasmas just can't.
Like what?
This is what generates those intricate, self-organizing features we see again and again in lab experiments. Things like vortexes swirling around, filamentary currents like tiny lightning bolts, and concentric shells like layers of an onion.
And these aren't just random flukes.
Not at all. They seem intrinsic to the state of matter. And Alfred's argument is that these naturally forming structures become the basic morphological building blocks for the plasma life form.
Okay, so the theoretical dark matter version would be this self-interacting dark plasma, dark electrons, dark protons, neutral dark particles. What plays the role of the dust in that scenario?
Well, the hypothesis is that the functional equivalent of that highly charged dust could be particles predicted by some theories, like supersymmetric cue balls. These are stable, non-topological solitons that could carry a large dark charge.
Cue balls.
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that. Something massive and charged to play the role of the dust. It's this complex or dusty nature of the plasma that allows the complexity of a living, self-regulating system to be built on top of the basic physics.
Speaking of self-regulation, let's switch gears a bit and challenge that old assumption that water is absolutely essential for life. Alfred mentions other researchers questioning this too.
That's right. Scientists like Christopher McKay, Dirk Schulze-McCrutch, they've suggested that water's crucial role here on Earth might just be, well, environmentally coincidental. Meaning it was simply the most abundant liquid around when life got started here. They point out other liquids found elsewhere, ammonia, methanol, even sulfuric acid, could theoretically do water's job as a solvent and transport medium under different conditions.
But Alfred's idea goes even further. The plasma solution doesn't just swap water for ammonia, it bypasses the need for any conventional liquid solvent.
Precisely. Alfred argues that these plasma life forms use magnetic fields for their structure, their skeleton, and highly conductive electrical circuits for transport. Water just becomes irrelevant. Instead, they utilize a liquid crystal plasma state.
Liquid crystal plasma, that sounds like a contradiction.
It does, but it's a real state of matter, often overlooked. It's somewhere between a rigid, solid crystal where particles are locked in place and a true flowing liquid where they're totally disordered.
So how does complex plasma get into and stay in this liquid crystal state?
It's because of those strong, nonlinear electrical interactions between the large, charged, dark matter dust particles, those cue balls we mentioned. These forces allow the complex plasma to maintain a kind of crystalline lattice structure while still letting particles move around.
So like a liquid, but ordered.
Exactly. The particles can flow and move, but they stay oriented in a highly specific, organized direction. Think of the pixels in an LCD screen. They can change orientation, but they stay in their grid.
Okay, and this property, you're suggesting this makes plasma a superior biological substrate to water. Why?
Because of how liquid crystals behave, they can instantly reorient their molecular alignment when you apply even a tiny voltage across them. So if the entire life form is made of this stuff, it means the organism could potentially control its internal biological processes, its movement, its structure, its energy flow, just by sending electrical instructions that change the orientation of its parts.
Whoa. Okay, hang on. So if I want to move my arm, my carbon-based system uses this whole cascade of biochemical signals, enzymes, ion pumps. It's relatively slow, complex.
Yeah, lots of steps.
But a plasma life form could just apply a voltage, and the physical structure instantly reorients and moves.
That's the core argument. The response time of a plasma liquid crystal to an electrical field is practically instantaneous compared to the slower, cascade-based biochemistry of water and carbon systems. This ability to have direct, immediate, maybe even voluntary control over its physical state via electrical commands could make plasma potentially superior for rapid physiological adjustment and response.
That sets things up nicely for understanding the complexity. Alfred breaks down where this complexity comes from into 3 layers.
Yeah, the first layer is just inherent physics. The complexity starts with the natural dynamics of complex plasma itself. It just forms filamentary structures, vortexes, shells, because of how electromagnetic forces interact at that scale. That's just what complex plasma does naturally.
Okay, physics provides the building blocks.
Then the second layer is biological adaptation. This is where the theoretical life form starts to harness and manipulate those natural plasma properties, the vortexes, the sheaths, the currents, to build complex networks and systems that actually fulfill biological needs, like energy generation, structure, waste removal.
Using the physics to make biology.
Exactly. And we even see hints of this connection in our own biology. Plasma physicists, people like Michio Uhara, even Nobel laureate Hannes Alfvén, they suggested long ago that basic concepts from plasma physics like charge neutrality, the Debye length, the double layer, are actually really useful for explaining how cell membranes work, even in our ordinary carbon-based cells.
So the physical principles might be universal.
The principles seem universal. Electromagnetism works the same everywhere.
And the third layer.
That's voluntary conscious control. We'll get into this more later, but it implies the life form could willfully manipulate its plasma body, all its internal electromagnetic structures, through some form of intelligent instruction, real agency.
Okay, so moving on to the actual body plan, the morphology, let's explore the physical architecture, starting right at the center, the nucleus. How does it form, and how does it store genetic information?
Well, remarkably, lab experiments simulating how complex plasma structures form have actually shown something like an embryogenesis process. Researchers observed that a luminous sphere often develops first. It naturally accumulates positive charges inside and gets surrounded by a shell of negative charges. Alfred identifies this as the rudimentary nucleus.
And the paper notes this plasma nucleus isn't just static, it pulsates rhythmically.
Yes, exactly. This pulsating sphere is highly charged, very dynamic, and apparently, at a certain critical electrical potential, this nucleus can detach and become free-floating within the larger plasma structure. And crucially, in this free state, it's been observed to undergo symmetrical division. It splits into 2 identical daughter nuclei.
Which is a dead ringer for mitosis in our cells.
It's the exact analogy. And since it's replicating itself and presumably passing on instructions for building the rest of the organism, it must be storing genetic information somehow.
Right, but electromagnetically, not biochemically with DNA. So how do you store vast amounts of complex data? An entire genome's worth using just charged particles and fields. That seems like a huge challenge.
Well, we need to lean on the idea of the incredibly high information capacity of elementary particles themselves. This isn't actually a new concept. Physicist Richard Feynman was talking about the potential for storing information at the atomic scale way back in 1959 in his Plenty of Room at the Bottom lecture.
Right, writing the encyclopedia on the head of a pin.
Sort of. And there's that real-world experiment using electrons in a Rydberg state that really drives the point home.
Explain that one again.
Okay, so when scientists excite an electron on a single atom into what's called a Rydberg state, the electron orbits really far out from the nucleus and behaves more like a spread-out wave packet than a tiny point. Researchers like Carla Stroud and Michael Knoll showed they could actually shape these electron wave packets to form complex patterns around that single atom nucleus. They literally wrote the word optidisis using these wave packets.
Using one atom's electron.
Yeah. And the key detail Alfred points out is that an electron in just one Rydberg state, say the state N50, has something like 2,500 possible angular momentum substates.
Okay.
That means one electron in one state could potentially store 2,500 bits of data instantly. Now scale that up to the trillions upon trillions of charged particles packed into a dense plasma nucleus. The potential information capacity becomes astronomical, far beyond chemical DNA.
So the plasma nucleus taps into this capacity. How does it encode the information?
As this dense, oscillating cluster of charged particles, it encodes genetic information not with chemical letters, but by generating complex, time-varying magnetic fields. It likely uses modulation techniques like amplitude modulation, AM, frequency modulation, FM, or phase modulation to encode the data onto these fields. Think of it like an incredibly advanced, self-pulsing magnetic hard drive.
Okay, so it stores the data. But how are those instructions reliably sent out to the rest of the body? And wouldn't that data be incredibly fragile, vulnerable to all the noise and chaos in a plasma environment?
Ah, that's where the specific physics of magnetized plasma comes in. The nucleus's pulsations physically displace the surrounding plasma and, crucially, the magnetic field lines embedded within it.
Right.
This rhythmic disturbance propagates outwards not just as a simple pressure wave, but as Alfvén waves. These are a special kind of wave in magnetized plasmas. They're transverse oscillations where the plasma itself and the magnetic field lines move together, kind of like waves traveling along a stretched guitar string.
So the magnetic field lines themselves are carrying the data, like vibrating strings.
Exactly. The modulated Alfvén waves, carrying the complex patterns generated by the oscillating nucleus, propagate throughout the entire cell along these magnetic field lines. It's analogous to how nerve signals travel in our bodies.
And the vulnerability issue.
Well, because the life form has this highly structured, shielded internal environment, particularly the coaxial cable structure, we'll get to the theory, is that the fidelity of that Alfvén wave signal transmission can be maintained over distance. It's not just broadcasting into chaos, it's sending signals down protected channels.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
So the life form needs more than just a nucleus. It needs a body. As it absorbs dark matter particles, it grows into this ovoid cell shape structured by concentric shells.
Yes, these shells are another signature feature observed in complex plasmas. They seem to form naturally due to gradients in charge density and pressure. They provide a vital sort of crystalline structure, giving the liquid crystal plasma life form its essential structural integrity. They're the scaffolding, the framework.
And these shells aren't static either. They exhibit this powerful counter-rotation.
That's right. Because of the way charged particles drift in electric and magnetic fields, the positive and negative particles in adjacent shells tend to drift in opposite directions. This causes the concentric shells to naturally start rotating alternately clockwise and counterclockwise.
Like gears turning against each other.
Exactly. And this counter-rotation is absolutely critical because it generates massive gyroscopic forces.
Which means, what does that do for the life form?
It acts like a built-in stabilization system. Imagine the plasma body is moving, maybe encountering turbulence in the surrounding dark plasmasphere. Those opposing gyroscopic forces resist any tumbling motion, stabilizing the entire body during movement. It passively maintains its orientation. Very elegant.
It's still a bit hard to picture something made of, diffuse plasma being structurally robust enough to withstand real forces. We usually think of plasma as so ethereal.
Yeah, that intuition is based on uncontained plasma. But electromagnetism is incredibly strong. Alfred reminds us of things like ball lightning, a plasma phenomenon that can apparently leave deep scorch marks on surfaces.
Right.
Or think about Earth's ionosphere. It's just a diffuse plasma layer, but it's strong enough to reflect massive radio waves right back down to Earth. When plasma is contained and organized by strong internal magnetic fields, these objects can be incredibly strong and resilient, potentially far exceeding the tensile strength we associate with, say, biological tissue.
Okay. Let's talk about what separates these robust shells, the double layers, sometimes called sheaths. You mentioned these perform the functions of both mitochondria and skin.
Yes, double layers or sheaths are another structure that forms naturally in plasmas. They are thin regions with a sharp voltage drop, essentially separating regions of different charge density or temperature. They form spontaneously to preserve quasi-neutrality across the boundary. It's an act of homeostasis, keeping the internal environment stable.
So like a cell membrane.
Exactly. Hannes Velden himself pointed out that a double layer acts very much like a natural cell wall or membrane, physically shielding the plasma interior from the harsher external environment. If you have multiple concentric shells, you get multiple sheaths, forming a resilient, multi-layered skin that could offer significant protection against things like external radiation.
But the functional analogy to mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cells, that's really compelling.
It is, because double layers are regions of intense charge separation. Positive charge builds up on one side, negative on the other. They generate incredibly strong localized electric fields. And what does that structure resemble? A capacitor.
Storing electrical energy.
Precisely. A capacitor stores potential electrical energy in the electric field created by that charge separation. Alfred proposes the life form stores excess energy absorbed from the environment in these numerous double layers throughout its body. When energy is needed for movement, computation, or anything else, the massive potential difference across a sheath can be discharged, releasing that stored electrical energy as kinetic energy for the plasma particles. They function as distributed banks of electrical batteries or biological capacitors, the plasma equivalent of mitochondria.
Okay, so we have energy storage. Now we need a central axis for this body, something like a spine and nervous system. This is provided by the straight and helical vertical currents. Explain this setup.
Okay, imagine the overall structure acts like a kind of biological battery or capacitor on a larger scale. The core of the body tends to accumulate the heavier, positively charged dark protons and maybe some neutrals, forming the anode.
The positive pole.
Right. Surrounding this core is a region where the lighter, negatively charged dark electrons tend to cluster, forming the cathode, the negative pole. And the abundant neutral particles in between act as a dielectric insulator, separating the poles.
So this electroconfiguration naturally generates a flow, a current.
Yes. You get a straight vertical current of the light negative electrons flowing inward from the cathode region towards the anode core. And simultaneously, you get a countercurrent of the heavier positive protons flowing in the opposite direction, away from the core. They are counterstreaming currents along the main axis.
Okay, straight currents flowing opposite ways.
And basic electrodynamics tells us that any straight electrical current generates a circular magnetic field around itself, right? Like wrapping your fingers around a wire using the right-hand rule.
Got it.
Now, when you combine these strong axial currents with the circular magnetic fields they generate, the charged particles don't just flow straight. Their paths get skewed by the magnetic field, causing them to spiral, to move helically around those central current paths. This forms a complex, twisted current structure known as a Birkeland current, which we also see in space plasmas like the aurora.
So you end up with straight current moving up and down the axis, and also helical current spiraling around that axis. It sounds very organized.
Highly organized. It effectively creates the body's backbone or central nerve. You have these two sets of composite currents, the straight axial component and the helical spiraling component counterstreaming along the core, and importantly, insulated from each other and the rest of the body by those plasma sheaths we talked about. The whole thing functions like a living, complex, coaxial cable.
And you mentioned earlier, those insulating plasma sheaths act like myelin sheaths around our nerves.
That's a great analogy, yeah. The sheaths ensure the electrical signals, like those alpha waves carrying genetic info from the nucleus, can travel quickly and efficiently along this axial current structure without shorting out or degrading. They maintain signal fidelity.
Okay. And there's one more crucial function of this helical current.
Yes. The helical current component, spiraling around the axis, acts like a giant electromagnet or a solenoid coil. And what does a coil generate? A large-scale magnetic field. In this case, it generates a global dipole magnetic field that extends outwards from the lifeform's body.
Like a mini-Earth's magnetic field.
Exactly like that. This dipole field acts as the lifeform's own personal magnetosphere, its primary shield, deflecting harmful external radiation and charged particles from the environment. It's a built-in protection system generated by its own internal currents.
Okay, we've built this really robust, complex body plan. Now, how does this thing actually function? Let's start with its circulatory system and skeleton, which seem to be tied together, the filamentary current grid.
Right. That main axial current, the spine we just discussed, that's just the largest, thickest filament. But extending out from that, smaller, pervasive filamentary currents develop throughout the entire body. These are all guided and ordered by the internal magnetic field lines. This intricate web of electrical currents forms the circulatory system.
So currents instead of blood vessels, what are they circulating?
They're distributing the necessary charged particles, the nutrients, like incoming dark electrons and protons, to all parts of the body. And just as importantly, they're collecting and removing spent or low-energy particles, the toxins or waste, carrying them towards the excretion points.
And you said the skeleton is tied into this.
Absolutely, because the magnetic field lines dictate where these currents flow. The magnetic field lines provide the underlying structure, the form, the skeleton of the life form.
Oh, okay.
And because the charged particles are spiraling around these magnetic field lines as they flow in the filaments, they naturally emit electromagnetic radiation, dark light in this case. This would make the grid appear as a bright, rotating network of light, tracing the pathways of the currents, essentially illuminating the skeletal structure from within.
That sounds visually spectacular.
Yeah.
Let's discuss the points where energy gets concentrated. The plasmoids. These are described as centers of intense energy. How do they actually form within this filamentary grid?
Okay, they arise from a really fundamental process in plasma physics called the pinch effect. Remember those two main vertical currents in the spine? one of positive protons, one of negative electrons flowing in opposite directions.
Yeah.
Now think about the direction of the current itself, which is conventionally defined by the flow of positive charge. Even though the particles are opposite, their effective current vectors can end up pointing in parallel directions along the axis.
Okay, parallel currents.
And parallel currents flowing in the same direction magnetically attract each other. This is the pinch effect. This magnetic attraction violently compresses the current filaments radially, squeezing the plasma inward very hard.
And that intense squeezing causes the current sheet or filament to break up.
Exactly. It becomes unstable and fragments into these discrete, coherent structures called plasmoids. These are basically self-contained bubbles or knots of plasma that trap both plasma particles and magnetic flux inside them. They become points of much higher density and intense stored energy.
And other effects help this.
Yeah, Alfred mentions that Hall effects, which arise because electrons and protons have such different masses and respond differently to magnetic fields, also play a big role. They introduce asymmetries and turbulence that can enhance this fragmentation process, allowing these plasmoids to form very rapidly at specific nodes within the current grid.
What's fascinating is the visual appearance this structure implies, especially because the life form is described as non-thermal.
Right. Non-thermal means there's a significant temperature gradient across the body. It's not all at one uniform temperature. The theory is the core, where the heavier positive protons concentrate, might be relatively cold. As you radiate outwards through the concentric shells towards the boundary, where the lighter, hotter electrons tend to cluster, the temperature rises dramatically. This steep gradient means that each concentric shell would likely radiate energy at a different characteristic frequency, which corresponds to a different color.
So like red near the cooler center, then orange, yellow, green, blue, violet towards the hunter edge.
Precisely, a rainbow effect from the inside out. And since the plasmoids are points of intense energy concentration and higher density, they would shine much more brilliantly than the surrounding plasma. And crucially, they would likely take on the color of the specific concentric shell they happen to reside in.
So the whole life form would be this dynamic, multicolored entity.
Yeah, potentially a spectacular shifting display of colors. Alfred suggests it would display the properties of a thermochromic liquid crystal, meaning its colors could change based on its internal energy state, temperature fluctuations, or maybe even its emotional state, if such a thing applies. It gives it an immediate visual indicator of its internal condition.
Wow. Okay, moving on to how it interacts with the outside world. Ingestion and propulsion via vortical structures. These seem absolutely key.
They really are. Vortexes are incredibly common in plasmas, often generated by that Hall effect again. Because electrons and protons have such different masses, they spiral differently in magnetic fields, and this difference can induce rotational motion, creating swirls and vortexes.
And these aren't just simple whirlpools.
No, they tend to form nested structures. You might get a tight, fast spiral of electrons embedded within a looser, larger swirl of protons, and very often they manifest as double vortex systems.
Double vortex.
Yeah, where a vortex structure effectively splits into two connected parts. You might have an outward-facing vortex at one point on the surface, maybe acting like an intake or mouth, and an inward-going vortex, perhaps at the opposite pole, acting as an exhaust. And these are connected internally by a kind of flexible, non-rigid plasma tube back to the main vertical current, allowing them to draw power and particles from the central system.
The structures themselves are also described as conical, like funnels.
Yes, that shape arises naturally from the physics. As charged particles from the environment spiral inward towards the life form along magnetic field lines, the magnetic field density typically increases closer to the body. This naturally causes the radius of their spiral path, their gyro radius, to shrink.
So they get funneled down.
Exactly. This generates a distinct conical or funnel shape. The narrow apex of the cone meets the plasmoid node inside the life form, which likely acts as a processing center for the incoming particles. The wide base of the cone flares out at the surface where it's gathering particles from the environment.
And crucially, the life form can control these funnels.
That's the idea. The angle of each cone is thought to correlate with the frequency of radiation coming from the plasmoid it connects to. And each vortex is believed to be tunable.
Tunable how?
By adjusting the local magnetic fields or the rotation speed, the life form could potentially tune each vortex to selectively attract and channel specific types of particles it needs, like tuning a radio receiver. It could efficiently suck in dark electrons, for instance, while rejecting other unwanted particles. It allows for selective feeding.
And these vortices also produce light, like auroras.
Yes. The collisions between particles spiraling within the vortexes, especially as they accelerate and get compressed, would naturally generate light, much like the auroral displays we see at Earth's magnetic poles where solar wind particles funnel in.
That leads to a really interesting speculation in the paper.
About interaction, yeah. Alfred suggests that vortexes existing at the interface between one of these dark plasma bodies and maybe a region of ordinary plasma, if they coexist, could potentially enable coupling and energy transfer between the two realms. Maybe through kinetic mixing, where the swirling motions physically transfer momentum and energy. This raises the possibility, however remote, that these entities might be able to subtly interact with our visible reality, perhaps by converting some of their dark energy into ordinary energy forms, or vice versa, through these vortex interfaces, a potential bridge.
Wow. Okay. Vortices also enable the formation of jets and focused beams of light. This sounds like something out of science fiction built-in weaponry or propulsion.
Well, the physics is seen elsewhere. Jets are a natural consequence when you have intense magnetic fields, like those concentrated in the plasmoid nodes at the vortex apex, being rapidly twisted by a rotating disk of plasma around them.
Like in space.
Exactly. We see this same mechanism powering the incredibly powerful jets ejected from accretion disks around pulsars and supermassive black holes. The rotating plasma twists the magnetic field lines like rubber bands, and when they snap back or reconnect, they violently eject particles along the rotation axis as a highly collimated, focused beam.
So the plasma life form could do this on a smaller scale.
Yes, by controlling the rotation speed and magnetic field configuration within its vortex nodes, it could generate these focused jets.
What would be the applications for the life form?
Alfred proposes several. Obvious ones are locomotion, using them as plasma thrusters for rapid, directed movement, and defense, releasing them in short, powerful bursts as plasma bullets.
Makes sense.
But also potentially more subtle uses, maybe for healing or internal regulation. Similar to how doctors are now experimenting with cold atmospheric plasma in medicine to influence cell behavior, these focused beams could perhaps be used internally by the life form to precisely modulate its own electric and magnetic fields for sophisticated self-repair or detoxification.
And one more application mentioned was display.
Yeah, this is more speculative, but since plasma can bend and focus light, acting like a lens, a highly evolved plasma life form might be able to use its jets to project complex, laser-induced plasmoid holograms into its environment, perhaps as a form of communication, art, or visual display. Instantaneous light shows generated from its own body.
Incredible. Okay, finally, let's put together the metabolic, respiratory, and digestive system. How do these plasma life forms actually get and process energy?
They are described as incredibly efficient autotrophs. That means they create their own food, their own energy, directly from non-living substances in their environment. They don't need to eat other organisms.
How do they do it?
They seem to have two main methods. Primarily, they are electrotrophs. They absorb the fundamental charged particles they need, dark electrons and dark protons, directly from the surrounding dark plasmasphere using that vortex suction mechanism we talked about.
So they literally just suck electricity out of the environment. They bypass eating and photosynthesis entirely.
Essentially, yes. For their basic building blocks and charge carriers, they are also likely photoautotrophs, meaning they can absorb useful energy in the form of radiation dark photons, maybe hypothetical particles like axions perhaps emitted from a dark sun or other cosmic sources.
And this direct absorption is highly efficient.
Hugely efficient compared to carbon-based life. Think about photosynthesis. It's a complex, multi-step chemical process to convert light energy into chemical energy. These plasma forms just absorb the electrical and radiative energy directly. It eliminates all those lossy intermediate biochemical steps.
So where does the excess energy go? Our cells store it in chemical bonds like ATP or fat. What do they use?
As we discussed before, the energy storage system is primarily the double layers, or sheaths, separating the concentric shells. They act as banks of capacitors, storing the absorbed energy as electrical potential energy in those strong electric fields.
And the distribution network.
That's the filamentary current grid. It acts as the body's electrical circuit. When energy is needed somewhere, it's discharged from the nearest double-layer capacitors and distributed rapidly through these conductive filaments, obeying standard electrical circuit laws like Ohm's law and Kirchhoff's laws.
Okay, so intake and energy storage are covered. What about waste Excretion, how do they get rid of unusable stuff?
This seems to be another job for the versatile double vortex system. It serves a dual function. One vortex, or set of vortices, sucks the useful nutrient particles in acting as the mouth.
Right.
And the vortex with the reverse spin, likely located at the opposite end or pole of the body, actively discharges the spent, low-energy particles or any other unwanted material acting as the excretion point.
So intake at one end, exhaust at the other.
Or potentially multiple intake-exhaust points. Since the life form can likely develop multiple double vortex systems over its surface, it could have many specialized routes for taking in different types of particles and expelling different types of waste. A very flexible, digestive excretory system.
And this discharge process is not invisible, is it?
Apparently not.
Hmm?
The process of expelling these lower energy discharge particles is thought to generate weak radiation across various frequencies. Alfred theorizes this would appear visually as a kind of colorful, shimmering aura surrounding the body. It would be a constant visible indicator of the life form's ongoing metabolic processes, its breathing and digesting, electrically speaking.
All right, this brings us to how these things actually move around, and maybe more importantly, how they can change their shape or exert force. Let's start with the muscular system and this idea of density modulation.
Right, so movement, especially fine control or changing shape, often requires precise contraction. How does a plasma body contract? The proposal is it achieves this by willfully increasing its own density. It does this by reducing its volume through intense, controlled magnetic compression.
Like squeezing itself with magnetic field.
Exactly. It's directly analogous to the mechanisms used in nuclear fusion research devices like Z pinches and theta pinches, where powerful magnetic fields are used to violently squeeze a plasma column.
But that must require immense focused energy and control. Where does that come from?
It comes entirely from the energy stored in those double-layer capacitors we keep mentioning. The life form would need to release carefully calculated, powerful pulses of electrical current from these layers. These pulsed currents generate intense, rapidly changing magnetic fields within the body. And these time-varying magnetic fields create inward-acting Lorentz forces that literally squeeze the plasma structure, compressing it. This dynamic, controlled, pulsing squeeze-release is the direct analogy to how our muscles contract and relax using chemical energy.
But wouldn't the plasma's own internal pressure, its thermal pressure, resist that compression fiercely? Plasma wants to expand, right?
It absolutely does, and that's the main challenge here. For a successful contraction to happen, the inward magnetic pressure generated by those pulsed currents has to increase faster and become significantly stronger than the outward thermal pressure that's naturally resisting the squeeze.
So it's a constant battle between magnetic pinch and thermal expansion.
Yes. It demands incredibly precise, perhaps conscious, voluntary control over the timing and intensity of the energy release from its internal capacitor banks. This magnetic compression method is probably used more for significant structural shifts, maybe changing buoyancy or perhaps bracing for impact rather than rapid locomotion.
Okay, so the magnetic muscle system is one way to exert force. But Alfred outlined several other distinct modes of locomotion. Let's run through them, starting with electric winds.
Right, this is more like a subtle, continuous propulsion. It's based on collisions happening inside the life form between the charged particles, electrons and protons, and the much more numerous neutral dark matter particles.
How does that cause movement?
When the charged particles are accelerated by internal electric fields, they bump into the neutrals, transferring momentum. This constant bumping generates a net directional flow, a steady outward blast of the neutral gas particles. It's literally an electric wind blowing out from the life form.
Like those bladeless fans.
Exactly the same principle. We use it in technology already. This generated acoustic pressure, this wind provides a gentle but continuous forward thrust for basic maneuvering or hovering.
Okay, second method, jet propulsion.
This is the high-speed option, more like how a squid moves. The life form uses its intake vortex system to suck particles in from the environment at one end, and then uses those focused plasma jet systems we discussed earlier to forcefully spew them out the opposite end.
Creating thrust.
Powerful reaction thrust, yeah. This likely allows for rapid acceleration and high-speed travel. And Alfred notes this movement could often be aided by riding on natural magnetohydrodynamic currents or flows that might exist in the surrounding dark plasma environment, much like a bird uses air currents or a fish uses water currents.
Makes sense. Third method, photonic propulsion.
This is probably reserved for higher energy, perhaps more evolved plasma life forms. Instead of ejecting massive particles like protons in their jets, they could generate highly collimated, intense beams of photons light, or rather, dark light.
Using light pressure for thrust.
Exactly, like a solar sail, but actively generated. This could offer even higher speeds, especially in a vacuum, harnessing energy in a very efficient, purely electromagnetic way.
And finally, perhaps the most advanced method, electromagnetic movement.
This is really interesting. It relies on the life form being able to voluntarily and temporarily modulate the distribution and strength of electrical charges across its own body.
How would that help it move?
By doing this, it could give specific parts of its body, or even the whole body, a temporary net positive or net negative charge. Once it's charged, it can then be accelerated by any weak, large-scale external electric fields that might exist naturally in the dark plasmasphere.
And guided.
And guided precisely along the ambient magnetic field lines that permeate the environment. Think of it like a living maglev train, levitating and accelerating along magnetic tracks. Or perhaps a better analogy is how sharks are thought to navigate vast ocean distances by sensing and using the weak electric fields generated by ocean currents moving through Earth's magnetic field.
So it's potentially very stealthy and incredibly energy efficient compared to brute force jets.
Absolutely. It's harnessing the environment's existing fields rather than expending massive internal energy on reaction mass. These electromagnetic modes likely represent the pinnacle of movement efficiency and control, far surpassing the mechanical limitations of carbon-based muscle systems.
Okay, this leads us inevitably to the highest layer of complexity Alfred proposed: biological control and intelligence. How does this fundamentally unicellular entity think, learn, and remember without a brain?
Well, the basic biological control, as we've touched on, seems to be exerted by directly manipulating those liquid crystal properties of the plasma body. Things like tuning the frequency, direction, and angle of the vortex spins, modulating density via magnetic compression, controlling the timing and focus of plasma jet releases. These are the immediate physical controls.
But intelligence, cognition.
Since they are technically unicellular, even if incredibly complex eukaryotes, Alfred proposes a model based on decentralized intelligence. We see parallels in organisms like slime molds or amoebae here on Earth, single cells that demonstrate remarkable problem-solving abilities, learning, and memory, all without a single neuron or a centralized brain.
How do they do it?
It's increasingly thought to be based on bioelectrical signaling and computation within the cell body and across colonies. And Alfred argues the plasma system is built on a computational substrate that's potentially far superior to biochemical networks for this kind of processing.
This connects to the work of researchers like Michael Levin, right, on bioelectricity in regular cells.
Exactly. Levin's work is groundbreaking here. He's demonstrated experimentally that the bioelectric fields generated by networks of ordinary cells, specifically by the voltage gradients across ion channels in cell membranes themselves, possess computational capabilities.
He argues those ion channels are essentially acting like biological field effect transistors, FETs.
Precisely. And FET is a fundamental component of modern computing. It's a voltage-gated switch that forms the basis of logic gates. Levin suggests that since every cell in our body uses these ion channels to create voltage patterns, networks of cells can form bioelectrical circuits that literally compute, process information, remember patterns, and make collective decisions about growth and form. It's not a metaphor. He sees it as a physical layer of computation below the nervous system.
Okay, so applying that analogy back to the plasma life form.
The structures within the complex plasma seem perfectly suited for this kind of bioelectrical computation. Alfred points out that the plasma sheaths, double layers, and the complex nonlinear wave interactions within the plasma naturally exhibit transistor-like properties, like bustable switching behavior, flipping between on and off states based on local fields.
So the hardware is there.
The hardware is inherently there. The combination of the filamentary current grid acting as the high-speed wiring or circuitry, and the multitude of double layers acting as the capacitors for memory storage, and the switching elements, like transistors, potentially creates an incredibly powerful and fast computational network distributed throughout the entire body.
Potentially faster and superior to our slow, chemical-based neural networks.
That's the argument. Electromagnetic signals travel vastly faster than chemical diffusion. This inherent speed, combined with the potential complexity of the network, could endow these life forms with problem-solving skills and memory capabilities that might rival or even exceed those of biochemical brains.
And because they are fundamentally electromagnetic entities, they have a built-in capability for something even more profound. Superintelligence.
Yes. Unlike us, needing complex sensory organs and language to communicate slowly, they could potentially network instantly and directly with other plasma life forms. How? Simply by transmitting and receiving information encoded on electromagnetic waves, or perhaps even acoustic waves propagating through the plasmasphere.
Like biological Wi-Fi.
Exactly. This could allow for the formation of temporary or even permanent collective consciousnesses, enabling massive parallel data sharing and computation across multiple individuals, a form of distributed superintelligence that's architecturally fundamental to their nature.
Okay, finally, let's cover replication and evolution. How do they reproduce and how do they evolve? The basic mode is fission, right?
Yes. Like many single-celled organisms, the primary mode of reproduction is proposed to be symmetrical binary fission, essentially, mitosis. The nucleus divides, the body elongates and splits, resulting in two genetically identical daughter cells.
And this leads to biological immortality.
Functionally, yes. Because the parent cell doesn't die, it essentially lives on as the two daughter cells. Barring accidents or predation, if that exists for them, there's no inherent senescence or aging process leading to death. The lineage is potentially immortal.
But for evolution, you need variation, you need mutations.
Right. And mutations would still occur, just like in any replicating system. Random errors can creep in during replication, or external factors like high-energy radiation in the environment could damage the electromagnetic genome stored in the nucleus. So, standard Darwinian variation and selection would still operate.
But Alfred suggests they might have very efficient repair mechanisms.
Yes, this is interesting. Because the genetic information is electromagnetic, they might be able to perform incredibly rapid error correction. Perhaps by comparing the electromagnetic state of the two daughter nuclei using resonance or wave interference before the fission process is fully complete. They could potentially calibrate each other using electromagnetic or acoustic signals, correcting most errors on the fly.
So high-fidelity replication, but some mutations still get through to drive diversity.
That seems to be the idea. Enough variation for evolution, but maybe less random noise than in biochemical systems. However, the truly radical idea for their evolution is fusion, or a form of endosymbiosis.
Not just splitting, but merging.
Exactly. This is proposed as a way to achieve rapid modular evolution. They could potentially enter into an endosymbiotic relationship where one smaller plasma life form is temporarily or permanently incorporated inside a larger one.
Like how our eukaryotic cells are thought to have acquired mitochondria and chloroplasts billions of years ago.
Precisely that concept, but potentially much more dynamic and controlled. For plasma life forms, fusing with another individual wouldn't just be about gaining a specific organelle. It could be like performing a massive instantaneous software or hardware upgrade.
They could sync their electromagnetic blueprints, integrate new code.
Something like that. By merging their fields and information, the host could potentially gain entirely new biological functionalities, structural components, sensory capabilities, or computational algorithms that the ingested symbiont possessed. It's a way to acquire complex adaptations in a single step, rather than waiting for slow, incremental mutations.
They would dramatically accelerate evolution.
Absolutely. It offers a powerful combination of randomness, which symbiont you encounter, and highly selective adaptation, integrating useful modules. Alfred argues this fusion-based modular evolution could be far superior to the slow pace of biochemical evolution, allowing for complexity to arise much, much faster.
And this merging doesn't always have to be permanent.
That's another key point. The relationship could be temporary. Opportunistic endosymbiosis might allow the ingested life form, the symbiont, to eventually leave the host, perhaps after exchanging information or performing a function, and then regenerate itself multiple times, ensuring its own biological immortality is also preserved. The system supports both temporary collaboration and permanent integration. Very flexible.
And they can also form larger structures temporarily without full fusion.
Yes, the paper mentions macrofusion. This is analogous to how some organisms like slime molds can aggregate. Individual plasma life forms could temporarily congregate, maybe linking their fields and coordinating their actions to form massive, temporary superorganisms that function like a multicellular entity for a specific purpose.
And then disband again.
And then disband back into their individual, immortal, and possibly now upgraded or informed units. It offers the benefits of multicellularity without the commitment or the loss of individual immortality. #outro. So when you look back at J. Alfred's biological blueprint, The real elegance, I think, lies in this incredibly direct mapping between fundamental plasma physics and core biological functions. It's an
Hmm.
architecture where structure and function are just unified by electromagnetism in a really fundamental way.
Yeah, we've really traced a complete system here, haven't we? The plasma sheaths acting as the skin and protective membranes, the
Mm.
double layers functioning like mitochondria, storing huge amounts of energy as capacitors,
Right. Distributed power packs,
the dense pulsating nucleus serving as this electromagnetic memory drive holding the genetic code,
the hard drive, yeah.
and that whole intricate network of filamentary currents forming both the circulatory system for transport and potentially the nervous system for communication and computation.
It all fits together based on known plasma behaviors. Concepts like homeostasis achieved through maintaining quasi-neutrality, self-organization into those gyroscopically stabilized shells, the sheer power and speed of electromagnetic current networks. Alfred argues these provide a complete biological architecture that, in many ways, could fundamentally surpass our own carbon-based systems.
Surpass in terms of
Efficiency, definitely. Speed of control, near instantaneous response via electrical fields, and maybe most profoundly, in its potential for rapid modular evolution and inherent networking.
which leads us back to that really shocking potential we started with. Life that is biologically immortal
No built-in aging.
exists potentially all around us, but in a state that's currently invisible to our instruments,
In the dark sector.
and possesses this built-in fundamental electromagnetic architecture that seems perfectly designed for achieving networked superintelligence.
Yeah, they seem inherently designed for rapid upgrades, for collective computation, for instant communication. The very materials they're made of, the liquid crystal plasma, the double layers, give them this potential for immediate voluntary control over their entire physiology just by manipulating electrical fields. It's an existence seemingly governed by speed, efficiency, and information flow in a way ours isn't.
So, okay, this leaves us with that final really provocative question to ponder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If these theoretical plasma life forms truly exist, and if they possess these potentially superior accelerated methods of evolution, are fundamentally immortal and can network their minds, how might their entire conception of reality, their understanding of time, of consciousness, of matter itself, differ from ours? Us, trapped as we are in these fragile, slow, chemical-based bodies that face inevitable decay and death.
It really forces you to question everything we assume about what life is and what it could be, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. A universe
Right.
potentially far stranger and far more alive than we've ever imagined.